Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Nicole with Made from Scrap, and today we are on week 3 of our Easy Mixed Media mini series that we're doing on this channel, and we are using it to pull out some of the stuff that we have not been working with in a while. We may be scared to work with, but we want to have some fun. So today we're going over embossing. I am going to be doing a little bit of embossing folders, embossing powder, embossing glaze, and so we're going to have a little fun. So I'm starting out with these little wood pieces that you saw me use some of the Distress Oxide and inks on in week 1, and I have pulled out some double-sided tape. I went ahead and put down some double-sided tape on to the mugs themselves, so we're going to make it look like it has a little stripe on it. And I am just removing the backing of that double-sided tape and going to be dumping some of this embossing powder right onto that tape, so it'll stick down nicely and give me a nice little look there on these. So I have 2 of those already. Let me go ahead and do the 3rd one here with you all. I'm removing that backing. I'm going to make sure to bend over any excess of that double-sided tape that might be hanging off. Pour that embossing powder right onto the tape. I'll just gently tap the remainder off. So I'm going to set this off to the side. And of course, with embossing powders, you do need to have your heat gun. So I'm bringing this in. I'm going to go ahead and heat it up, and you speed along the video. Okay, and just like that, we have some mugs that have some little bit of embossing powder that's been melted onto them, giving it a little something extra. Now, I did forget to say that before I put the tape down, I did go ahead, I put the tape down and then I used my little embossing buddy. If you have a cornstarch pouch, you can use that as well. Just tap it along a little bit. That helps keep all the miscellaneous little specks of powder from hanging on to areas you don't intend for it to be. So now we have those. We're going to set those aside. So use your double-sided tape and your embossing powders to give something a quick updated look. And I'm going to move on to some of the fun leaves that we played around with the inking. And with these, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of the same thing, with the exception of I'm going to pull out an embossing pad, and what I'm going to do is just touch the edges of these leaves, just like so. And as I do that, I want to pour some of my embossing powder onto that before it dries. So I'm gonna just dump it on a little bit here and there as I go. I'm just looking for the edges of my leaves to be done. So I'm gonna go ahead and speed this along, and you can play along with me. Okay, now I haven't heated this up just yet, and you can see from using that square stamp pad, I have some squared edges. So I'm just going to brush those a bit off, just using my finger, just so it gets a little bit, a little less straight. Okay. this one a little bit. And I want to do this one a little bit. I think I'm happy with that. So again, I'm going to go ahead and use my embossing gun to heat those up and melt those little plastic embossing powder pieces. Okay, hopefully you can see from that, we went ahead and made some of these leaves to have some gold on the edges. And hopefully that gives a little bit of a different look to it. I like that a lot. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is move along to some other embossing powders, which happen to be some embossing glazes, and some are glaze, some are powders, but I'm going to use this stencil. We did this last week where we used some texture paste to add some texture to our pages, and I'm just going to go ahead and quickly smear on some of that texture paste onto the stencil, or through the stencil onto my paper that I've cut down here. And what we want to do is work with this texture paste while it's wet, because we're going to go ahead and put our embossing powders right onto that wet texture paste. Okay, and so I'm just moving this around. I'm going to go ahead and load this up before I remove it. Okay, let's not put anything in it. I'm going to go ahead and do a second one really quick so we can, you know, make multiples. Okay, doesn't take long to do. I'm just using this little knife at an angle to spread the material across it. Okay, so that I don't have just a glob on there that's way too thick. Just means it'll dry a little, take a little bit more time to dry, but also if you have a really detailed design, you might lose that. So what do we do when we pull up our stencil? We put that right into a water bath. Okay, so I'm going to do that. I have one more that I want to play around with. So I'm going to bring this stencil in, and I tell you what, I think I'm going to set this off to the side real quick. And I think I'm just going to do this just kind of haphazard. So I'm gonna pick this up, I'm gonna move it over. I'm gonna try to hold up that edge right there, so I don't get that line through the paste. Which I did right there. And I'm just gonna go with it. So I'm gonna do this, maybe hold this up like this. Okay. A little bit of a wood grain there. I'm going to place this right in my water bath as well. Okay, scrape off the remainder into my jar, and I'm going to put my tool into the water bath, and then I'm going to place a little bit of plastic wrap down into my jar to help squeeze out the air, because the air is not our friend when you have texture paste. So that will help dry it out. All right, now while we have these wet still, am gonna go ahead, remember I have a little mat down in this case to help me. I am going to go ahead and just use my pinchers here. And I'm just gonna do a little bit of pinching of the colors right onto that design. Okay, I'm gonna put it in the middle there. Okay, that one is Wild Honey. I'm gonna go ahead and use some of this, which is Crackling Campfire, and I should have done that second one as well. But I'm gonna spread this out a little bit here. I'll do some right around that middle. I'm gonna go ahead and do this one as well while I have this color out. I'm really just rolling my fingers to get that powder sprinkled pretty much where I want it to be sprinkled. Now, of course, it's not going to be exact. This is mixed media. It doesn't work that way. So we're going to go ahead and just do a little bit of sprinkling here. Just like that. I want to use a little bit of this lumberjack plaid. This is a new one, newer one. Color, distress color. Some reds and yellows, oranges onto this texture paste. I'm also going to use a little bit of that on the wood. It'll be a little bit lighter on the red. That was the lumberjack plaid, and now this is the Crackling Campfire. Again, like I said, I'm gonna just be a little bit lighter on this. Majority of this, I'm gonna use a brown. This is a Rusty Hinge. Now I'm gonna keep sprinkling these on until I feel that I'm all done. Okay, now I'm going to do this brown one first. I'm just bringing in this little tray that I like to work with, and I'm just going to tap a little lightly to kind of get off the excess. Anything that's stuck to the texture paste, stuck to the texture paste. Anything that didn't. And we just have this mix that's available here if we wanted to. Go ahead and put some more on to our page. We can, but we don't have to. We can use that for something else. I feel like I do want a little bit more on these edges here. So of course it will only stick if it's actually still damp. Good. Then the rest of this just goes by the wayside, so we get rid of that. Okay, then we're going to do exactly the same thing with these others. I'm just going to lightly tap it. And just like that. Isn't it pretty? Super pretty. Okay, and the second one. Now with the texture paste, we don't want to use the heat gun because it will bubble it up a bit. So we're just going to have to set this aside, let it dry first, and then we'll come back and use our heat gun to heat up the glaze that's on top or the embossing powders that's on top. Okay? Okay, so let's move on. Now I have an embossing folder, and what I'm going to do is go ahead and emboss this, but what I'm going to use is my embossing, sorry, not that. I'm going to use an ink pad. So I'm going to use an ink pad that a couple of ink pads that I've had in my stash. I have no idea if they're any good. And I'm actually putting this on the raised side of the embossing pad, of the embossing folder, that is. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. This is the side of the folder that will squish into the paper. This one looks to be a little bit better. So that one's going to go in the trash because I actually used it. Good. Probably didn't use it as much as I could have, but still nonetheless. All right, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and mist my embossing folder with some water. That is just going to help the paper fibers work. So I'm going to go ahead and put this into my machine. I'm going to use my sandwich and I'll be right back. I'm going to go ahead and do a second one here, using a bit of brown. Piece of paper, a little mist with water. Close this up and we'll run it through the machine. Okay, and this is the second one that I did. So this is with some ink, and you can see, look how crackled. Doesn't that look like crackled paint? Here's the first one with just the gold. Okay, and then I'm gonna do a third one, inking up the opposite side, and let's see how that looks. Now, just give it a really good squishing on there. Ink it up just like you would a stamp. Okay, we'll lay that down, and I'm gonna give it a spritz with water. Run it through the sandwich. Okay. And just like that, we have the opposite on there. So I will go ahead and wipe down my folder with a little baby wipe. Get it cleaned off. Like that, I have 3 different versions using that one embossing folder and some ink. Now I am going to go ahead and distress the edges and distress the top. So I'm going to use some of this distress ink. And I'm just going to go ahead and do a little bit of a round circular motion here. And you can see just like that, look how much texture it gives. But by doing that with the ink on the embossing folder, you can see how it got into the grooves to really give it some dimension on there. Doesn't that look cool? We'll look at the reverse. Isn't that cool? Keep this one real light, just by swiping across it really lightly with that foam brush. And see, I used a really cheap paper for this, so you can see it will tear very easily. So just be careful, know what you're doing, okay? And know that you're just playing around with mixed media. You're making some different looks on this. And let's go ahead and do some using this embossing. I'm going to go ahead and speed it up. Okay, something else I was going to go ahead and emboss are the edges of these sunflowers. So just like your paper, these are paper, and you know, you can go ahead and mix something up by having your flowers have a little embossing on the edge too. And by the way, if you don't get all the bits that you wanted the first time around, you can always come back to putting more embossing glaze on something or powder on something after you've heated up your first go around. So let's go ahead and give these a quick little heat and see how much different they look. Okay, we did the one side of them, and now we're going to get the second side because I did heat that up and melt it. Put a little bit on those tips. Okay, I'm going to heat them up now again. Okay, now that I'm done with that, I have some cute little sunflowers. I'm just going to bend this around my pen here. Cute little stem. Rustic. And I think the one last thing I'm going to do is go ahead and pull out some of my sprays and spray a little bit of these with some Mica Stains to give them a little bit of a background or a little bit of brown, because I'm not sure. Let's give this a go. Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to get into the crevices with this sponge here as much as I want to, so I'm going to give it just a little bit of a spray. Okay, so I've shook up my Distress Oxide, and I'm going to give this paper a little bit of a squirt here, a mist with some water. Let me go ahead and spray that a little bit with that. Get a little bit more water. Get it moving around, and then I'm going to use my heat tool, not the embossing gun, but the heat tool. Okay, I shook up this Mica Stain Fallen Acorn here, and I'm going to give it a little, just a little squirt on there. And then I'm going to go ahead and spritz it with some water. And then I'm going to use my heat tool to dry it again.